The New Triumvirate by Conway Fitzgerald. Chapter 4.
Thanks to Lassiter's potion, I was prepared for the noxious gases that filled the pit, but not for the complete darkness to where it led. Lighting up a torch could cause a nasty underground explosion. I understood fully that sulfur was quite combustible. I used it within many of my magic components, especially my pyrotechnic spells. A rudimentary light magic would suffice for now, but as I flew deeper into the foggy pit, I noticed my magic light was already dimming. The loft of my flight magic was also being weighed down, resisted by unseen forces. I figured it had to be that I was closing in on the source of the Darkstone. That thought only made my nerves give in further to the fear, which caused me to doubt myself, and the wisdom of this mission, which then caused me to lose focus and crash into a large stalagmite. When I impacted the jagged floor of the tube, my magic light was doused. I was in complete darkness. Iterabu, Lumosien, I called out amid my coughs, bringing a magic light back to my hand. Its illumination was being suppressed, just like what we witnessed at the Karik door. I needed to find a way out of this tunnel quickly. I used a basic levitation incantation, which enabled me to drag myself weightlessly along the roof of the cave, using the cavern's many stalactites. Finally, as my coughing was becoming more extreme, I came across an opening. The cavern hollow ahead had more breathable air, but it was filled with intense heat. As I approached, I could see a lava river far beneath, which was causing the sulfuric gas to fill the vent. There was a rock platform high above the lava stream, which was clearly man-made. It appeared to be a drop-off point, which led only to the fiery cauldron below. Suddenly, the door to a metal gate was thrown open, and two human men rolled a wheeled cart closer to the edge of the platform. I floated above them and brought myself closer to the opening from which they came. The two men then started heaving trash into the pit below. There, the trash and human waste was consumed by the lava. I hung from the roof of the passage and peered down the hall beyond to see what was there. As I did, my levitation magic became duller, and I descended softly to the ground. One of the servants noticed me immediately. I pulled my two swords and cut them both down before they could react or cry out. I then kicked their limp bodies down into the pit with the rest of the human waste. These two servants both wore a white tunic with the black starfall symbol on its front. Before I kicked the second corpse into the pit, I got a decent idea of what their uniform looked like. I then incanted a polymorph magic and reinforced it with extra duration magic. I made myself appear as one of the disposal servants. I could see my visage was phasing in and out, but it would have to do for now. I then took the cart and wheeled it before me, back towards the iron gate, which led to wherever it was these servants came from. I then attempted a knock spell. Pidamkin doho, I said, snapping my fingers in the direction of the lock. It sizzled, but did not open. I reached for my thieving tools. I was happy that I remembered to pack them amid the sea of things I had left in Lassiter's study. Just then, the gate opened.
It's about time.
Two guardsmen then walked away from me, back towards another doorway ahead. One of the guards then fumbled through his keychain until he found the one that opened this door. Just as he unlocked the door, the other guard noticed I was only one servant.
What happened to the other one?
He asked suspiciously, leaning his gaze back towards the gate. I did not hesitate. I had to kill both guards expeditiously. Not because I needed to get in, but because I needed to ensure that I had a way out. I passed through the locked doorway that the guardsman had opened before I killed him. I opened the door slowly peering out into a broad marble floor hallway. There were staircases leading up on the other side of this hall, as well as several sealed doors. Instinctively, I ducked into a shadow to my right. A nearby door was being opened.
I'll go and see what's keeping them,
said another armored guard as he emerged from the doorway. As he passed me by unnoticed, I darted into the doorway deftly behind him. There, among a table with drinks and playing cards, remained his companion, another defender of the crypt. This one let out a cry as I pierced his stomach with my sword. I then slashed his neck with my other sword and forced his body back with a kick. I then braced myself along the wall opposite the doorway as his companion returned.
What was that?
He asked innocently. My deadly sword strikes were quite merciful in both their precision and the certainty they offered of a swift death. After clearing the station, I was confident I had removed the entire squad of guards that remained within this basement crypt. I figured I might encounter some priests or other servants before I found the documents, but I felt certain I had a clear path out of there.
Aermine, where are you? Where have you been? Return to us, Aermine.
I could hear ghostly voices calling my name.
Aermine,
I couldn't determine where they were coming from.
where have you been? Return to us, Aermine.
They sounded like people I knew once, or perhaps in days to come.
Aermine, is that you?
Though I couldn't place them or the face attached.
Where are you, Aermine?
It occurred to me that this level was constructed very near the crypt of the Old Order. That is why it was referred to in the old drawings as the crypt. As the whispering voices continued, it felt as if they called from the door beyond. As I approached, they continued to taunt and lure me. My thoughts returned to Dylan's spire, the ear of the gods, and the advice the great seer had offered him posthumously. I considered that perhaps all the angered throngs within the many chambers of heaven and hell were attempting to contact me all at once and in concert. The sound intensified. You don't have to listen, I remembered was Fergus's written advice to Dylan. With that thought, the voices subsided. This sudden silence enabled me to concentrate and pick the lock on the door before me. As I thrust it open and entered, the voices returned in earnest.
Aermine, where are you? Where have you been? Return to us, Aermine.
They called, ever more loudly. I entered the large, expansive hall cautiously. In the center of the hall, there were 4 sheet coverings that were draped from 4 steel poles, each about 10 feet high. They were a thin barrier to something terrible that lurked just beyond. As I moved closer to the cubic facade, I could feel a unique sensation. It was cosmic force. Of that I was sure. My nerves got the better of me, and flight entered my mind. I breathed in deeply, then held my breath as I slipped past the sheet covering. There before me on the other side of the sheets was a large, circular pit cover made of wood. In the circle at the center was a deep pit below. I approached it slowly, cautiously. The voices intensified. The cosmic force grew. When I reached the precipice and could see down below, I saw the source of the dark stone, the very place of the starfall's impact. It hummed and groaned like a sentient being that had been alerted to my presence. There were wooden ladders leading into the pit below. There were picks and axes, and evidence of extended mining operations even further below.
It's quite impressive, isn't it?
Asked Sloane, as the voices assaulting my ears took a brief respite. He stood motionless, with his back to the sheet covering. He was intensely calm. I pulled my two swords from my back scabbards as I approached him slowly, trying to remain calmer than he was. Sloane was a big, strong human, and he was an experienced ranger. I had to rely solely on skill and quickness if I expected to survive engaging him in battle, hand to hand. I had no access to my vast repertoire of magic enhancements I had come to rely so heavily on. "Is it just us?" I asked. Rather than respond, he simply stared me down as he shook his head no, slowly. In that moment, I realized escape was my only option. I had been drawn into a trap. I retreated from Sloane back towards the pit, glancing down to ensure there were no rangers hiding in the mining rig. But just as I approached, two different members of the Regian Rangers popped out and drew their weapons before me. I sprinted away from them towards the draped covering. I used my best speed to then slide on the stone and skid myself underneath the hanging top. I then gathered myself off the stone floor quickly and scrambled to the only shadow I could find for hiding. The now dozen Regian Rangers encircled me as they exited the starfall. They approached my hiding spot slowly and methodically. There were double doors before me. They were the only barrier between myself and certain death, so I burst through them. On the other side of the double doors, the previous voices were joined with thousands more. I tried to cover my ears as I searched for cover, but nothing could mute this cacophony of voices. It was then I realized I was in a dark temple. There was an ominous dais before me, surrounded by a hall filled with silent god artifacts and tapestries throughout. I tried one last time to evoke a teleportation spell to get me out of this place. It failed. As my magic spell was dimmed, a heavy leather net was cast around me. The noise in my ears was so overwhelming, I didn't even react to being ensnared. That is when the Regian Rangers took their wooden clubs to me. I was struck so many times I lost count. I had never been so badly hurt. I did not expect to survive, but I did. The following afternoon, Sherman and Marsek returned to their lives as usual, but that too was about to change. The abbot entered their scriptorum with two senior brothers in tow. He called out to the boys from a distance as to denote their emotional distance they had earned from him.
I am happy to report that this nonsense you've both found yourselves ensnared in is finally over,
he said. The other brothers nodded in approval at the boys, assuming they too should agree it is all good news they brought.
I don't understand,
Sherman asked.
The elvish brigand, the one you were sent to interview in the woods. She has been captured. She is now in the custody of Sloane's men. It is over,
the abbot said confidently.
I thought you'd be relieved that you can put this unfortunate episode behind you and begin the process of your penance. Penance?
Answered Marsek angrily.
For what? We were the ones who have been used, at risk to our lives for this devious enterprise. We are not to blame,
he said defiantly.
So, You think because you are a dabbot, you can speak to me this way? It's time you learned your place.
The abbot threatened.
Are you saying that Tia Aermine has been captured? That she's in the custody of Captain Sloane?
Sherman asked again.
Yes, they apprehended the Red Witch last night. 300 years of crime and deceit, but she couldn't get past Captain Sloane.
The abbot pined on.
If she has been incarcerated, then who has been appointed to her legal defense?
Sherman asked innocently. There was a long, tense silence among the brothers gathered, and the abbot. Sherman finally broke the silence.
If she is being charged with crimes, she deserves the right to legal defense.
She deserves nothing. Why do you insist on miring yourself in this villain's cause?
The abbot asked angrily. Then he smiled at Sherman, thinking he had figured it out.
Oh, I see. She's offered you boys favors, did she? Shown you her skills as a temptress? Did she bring you both so much pleasure to cloud your minds so? Tell me, what did she do to you?
The abbot asked, with distasteful interest.
She did no such thing.
Marsek defended his friend.
Tia Aermine is the last thread of the old order. She actually knew the great seer personally. Fergus of Ebach called her sister. Aermine speaks the truth. Her voice must be heard. You actually believe that?
The abbot demanded.
Yes,
Sherman exclaimed.
we know it to be true. Then perhaps you should champion her legal cause.
One of the other brothers jested. All the others laughed.
Perhaps we shall,
Answered Marsek.
We both have notes of achievement and certificates of efficacy from the High Court, in both civil as well as criminal law. We are well qualified to do so.
He said naively. The abbot and brothers laughed again. Abbot Stolkren could see they were serious.
Now you listen to me.
He said authoritatively as he closed in on them.
Any action to present legal defense for this criminal is hereby expressly forbidden at this church. To do so would mean expulsion and excommunication.
He said with emphasis.
Neither will be necessary,
Marsek said assuredly.
because I am no longer a member of this church or this abbey. I renounce my place here.
He said defiantly.
As do I.
Said Sherman. The two took off their ceremonial tunic covers and handed them to the brothers as they left the room. They then descended the 5 floors of stairs quickly, before Stolkren could demand that they stop and reconsider. The two then bolted out of the main double doors of the abbey forcefully. As he looked out to the open streets before him, Sherman exhaled with nervous exhilaration.
Oh my, what have we just done?
Sherman asked his best friend nervously, with a tempered smile.
I don't know,
Answered Marsek, smiling.
but it feels amazing.
Sherman shared in his enthusiasm, but had a stark realization.
Wait,
Sherman motioned with a reasoned sentiment.
we should probably gather our things.
He said sheepishly. Just then, from the high window of their scriptorum on the 5th floor, came a steady stream of their few remaining possessions. The brothers tossed their garments, cleaning supplies, their toiletries, personal effects, and then finally, for good measure, the massive tome of wisdom was cast down at them. The ancient tome smashed to the stone street, breaking its binding, causing several pages to fall away. The boys gathered their things feverishly as the brothers in the tower above laughed and shouted down insults at them. Sherman fumbled into the crowded street, trying to recover every loose page of the Tome of Wisdom, his most prized possession. After they had gathered their many stray things, they marched from view of the abbey with purpose. After the initial nervous rush of their rebellion diminished, they both paused to consider their next move. They sat on a curbside as the traffic of the city's late-day rush ensued around them. Sherman was going to speak first, but Marsek interrupted him, having pulled a leather satchel from his chest.
This is what's left.
He said of the remainder of money they had left from their mission into the woods.
There's 37 silver pieces and some copper coins.
He held the leather purse tightly.
That will certainly afford us a place to eat and sleep tonight,
He said confidently.
I reckon we could also enjoy a round or two of sweet brandy in honor of Aermine.
He smiled. Sherman concurred. The two then made their way down to the Hungry Dragon, one of the largest and notorious flophouses in Vosse. The pretty young women outside waved the boys in.
Oh, hello. Is the kitchen still open?
Asked Sherman, motioning to his empty stomach. Of course. Everything you need is inside, boys. Come in. The young girl smiled widely at Sherman and touched his cheek with an unexpected display of affection.
5 hours later.
Do it again! Do it again! The two young barmaids laughed out loud at Sherman's impersonation of his former abbot. They egged him on to continue.
What did she do? Use her skills as a temptress to cloud your minds with pleasure?
Sherman imitated Stolkren with the telltale trembling of his head while he spoke. Marsek and the two young women they had attracted to their table burst into laughter again. Sherman enjoyed the feeling of creating comedy and entertaining others. He was inspired.
Milady,
He called out to the bar wench.
another round. Let us drink together. To the red.
Sherman called out boldly. The girls had no idea who the Red was, but they certainly agreed to share another drink on the boy's coin.
To truth and justice,
Sherman declared. They all cheered and drank, oblivious to the toast's real meaning. One of the young girls came closer to Sherman and whispered into his ear.
Let's go upstairs.
She said softly. Sherman looked at her with surprise, struck by a different kind of nervous excitement. Her touch on his shoulder and the moistness of her lips upon his ear made him erect. Sherman looked over to Marsek, who was also being propositioned by the other young whore.
yes, I suppose we should probably call it a night. We've both had quite a bit to drink.
Sherman acknowledged to Marsek, attempting to hide his bulge as he stood up, a bit wobbly. Sherman meant to suggest that he and Marsek would excuse themselves from the party and return to the small room they rented on the second floor. But Scala had other ideas. She grasped Sherman by the hand without hesitation and led him towards the stairway. The drunken bar dwellers cheered the boys on as they were led upstairs. Marsek and the other girl descended into the bed to the right together before Sherman could offer the girls a proper goodnight. He was stunned to watch Marsek embraced in a kiss with the other girl. Scala grasped Sherman's cheek gently and pulled his eyes back to her. She put her hand on his chest softly and then leaned on him until she was on top of him on the second bed. She kissed his lips and ran her hands in his hair. Scala raised herself above him, straddling his trembling body and throbbing loins. She smiled at him as she undid her leather mammillaire, exposing her supple pink breasts to him. Sherman was astonished.
Wait, miss. That is, I have never...
Sherman mumbled nervously. Scala put a seedling in her mouth and bit down on it, cracking it in her mouth. She then descended upon him again, silencing him with a passionate kiss. As she did, she passed the cracked seed into his mouth with her tongue. She kissed and grinded on top of him in a mesmerizing fashion until Sherman succumbed to the permil seed, fast asleep.
7 hours later.
The flimsy door to their small flophouse room was thrust open forcefully. Sloane and his fellow tracker named Paru entered the room slowly and silently to find the boys still asleep in their cheap, mouse-filled haybeds. Sloane lurched his hefty gaze over to Marsek and observed that he was still breathing. He then approached Sherman's bed. Sherman was snoring peacefully, as usual. Sloane then tapped his sword firmly on the haybed's exterior wooden frame. Sherman was jostled from sleep. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with fear.
Good morning,
said Sloane.
Fancy finding you two here, and not at the Abbey.
Sloane said loudly, as Paru inspected their scattered things on the floor. The girls had made off with all of their coin and valuables, but the other items, particularly the heavy tome of wisdom, they left behind.
So what brings two innocent young scholars to the hungry dragon?
Sloane asked suspiciously.
You boys look like you've had a long night. I suppose it was the red that taught you how to drink.
Marsek awoke and sat up from his bed. He then gasped as he noticed Mighty Paru peering at him. The huge human tracker was seated upon the only chair in the room. His massive size dwarfed the tiny chair. Paru glared at Marsek as he picked up the Tome of Wisdom from the floor. He then started inspecting the crusty pages without expression.
What is the meaning of this intrusion? Why are you in our room without permission?
Demanded Marsek. The two rangers then looked at each other and smirked.
2 hours later.
The heavy iron door to the jail cell slammed behind them. Their ankles were shackled together with a ball and chain. There were a few other petty criminals in the cell with them who had no such extreme bindings. They smiled when they saw the two handsome young boys so encumbered. Sherman and Marsek huddled together defensively in the corner of the cell. Sherman spoke first.
Whatever shall we do now, brother? We can't defend Aermine, whilst we ourselves are imprisoned. Oh, the injustice!
Sherman complained dramatically.
Well, first, we need to get ourselves bailed out of here. Then we can worry about Aermine. If she's still even alive.
Marsek shared his fears that this valiant effort might all be for naught.
Do you think they would just kill her?
Sherman asked. Marsek looked at him with disappointment.
This is Mist we're talking about.
Marsek reminded him.
He's probably angered that Stolkran let it slip, that she was taken alive at all.
The bail was set at 50 Torbanian crowns for each of us. How could we ever raise that?
Sherman wailed.
2 weeks later.
Unbeknown to most in Vosse, including his best friend, Sherman, Marcek Dabbit was the son of Jean Dabbit, an extremely wealthy and influential trader from Torbana. That very morning, Marsek's father arrived in Vosse personally and made his presence known to Stolkren, who was likely the only other person in Vosse savvy to the significance of the Dabbit name. Within hours, Sloane himself escorted the wealthy tradesman to the cell that housed his son. When Marsek saw his father's face, he leapt up from the floor with relief.
Father, it is you.
He called out. His son's face was bearded, dirty, and emaciated. Sherman was forced to follow Marsek closer to the cell bars, as they were bound together by a ball and chain. Jean did not respond. He simply stared at his son with a look of saddened contempt. Sloane instructed the jailer to open the cell door.
You.
The ranger said, pointing to Marsek.
Not you.
Sloane said, holding Sherman back in the cell as the jailer removed the iron ankle chain from Marsek. Sherman's mouth was gaped and his eyes teared with a pitiful look of fear. Marsek turned to his father.
Father, we cannot. Sherman must be released as well, or I will not leave.
Jean did not bother to quibble over the bail money with his son. He simply wanted to get out of that smelly prison as quickly as possible. He agreed to bail out Sherman in addition to his son. The two boys signed their own bail notices and their newly ordered court summons as Jean parted with a large amount of his gold. The boys were then given their remaining personal effects. Sherman's thin arms were filled with the savaged, loosely bound pages of the Tome of Wisdom. The two boys were then escorted from the prison to a waiting carriage, which took them all back to Hivar Hotel, a large luxury hostel about a mile from the city center. Along the way, Jean remained silent. Finally, Marsek broke the silence.
Well, thank you, Father. It is good to see you again.
Yes, thank you so much. I am so grateful.
Sherman added meekly. Jean cleared his throat as if to suggest they should both be silent. But he did not speak.
Father, I know this doesn't look good.
Marsek attempted to explain.
No, it doesn't look good at all.
His father agreed. Marsek paused, and then attempted to explain to his father everything that had transpired over these last 2 months. The governor's mission, how they were sent alone into the woods to find me, which they did, and of learning the remarkable true story of the giant killers. Jean listened quietly and patiently until Marsek got to the part about their meeting with Governor Mist at his palace, and the weird speech he gave about the starfall, and the large dark stone he held in such high regard. Jean did not do much business himself in Vosse, which is why he was reluctant to allow his son to study there. But he had heard stories about Mist, none of which were very flattering. It was only when he learned that it was truly Mist that they were opposing that their appeal made any sense. After hearing the entire story, Jean nodded at them.
I understand. I agree. That if you are sure this woman is innocent, or at least deserves a fair trial, she should get one. But you certainly cannot do it yourselves. Dressed like that,
He said, motioning to the filthy tunics they had worn for weeks. The boys smiled with excitement.
Get yourselves cleaned. We will eat, rest, and then prepare you to see this matter handled properly.
Marsek's father said proudly. The following day they were taken to a custom tailor and fitted with several new suits, befitting the status of a legal professional in Vosse. They were the latest fashion. Jorm then took them in his carriage to a storefront, not far from the courthouse where they were summoned to appear in the coming days.
Stop here, driver.
Jorm said.
Oh, what is this?
Marsek asked. His father stepped out of the carriage, and the boys followed. The senior Dabbit peered into the glass window of the storefront, which was currently vacant.
Well, it's not much, but I was able to lease it for a short period of time, until this matter is resolved. You'll need an office, as well as a place to live.
His father announced.
You can share this place with Sherman.
They both agreed.
Oh, Father. It's perfect. Thank you.
Marsek embraced him. His father motioned for him not to show such affection in public. It was unbecoming for serious business types. He simply nodded and then gave them each a key. He then handed Marsek another satchel filled with coin.
I need to leave this town now, before I attract even more attention to myself.
He said nervously, scanning the streets for Sloane's hidden agents.
Son, you must grow up now. Be smart.
He said, pointing to his head.
You must realize what you're up against and face it boldly. Don't be fearful. But don't be foolish. Stick to the law.
He said authoritatively.
That's why I sent you here. To learn it and obey it.
The two boys smiled at their sudden influx of good fortune.
And if you should ever feel threatened or such by Mist's goons, don't try and fight them. Don't hesitate to leave. Hire a carriage to Turbana. I can always petition the king himself to investigate this matter with Mist. No one trusts him. He is a pariah, so be careful. And good luck.
His father said solemnly. The following morning, dressed in their finest new suits, the boys returned to the magistrate's office to present their letter of intent to represent. They named their client as Tia Aermine of the White Flame. They also included all of her known aliases, including the Red, as well as the Restorer. They were wise to announce their intentions publicly. They shared a penned copy of this writ prior to this public pronouncement with many of Vosse's most influential thinkers and writers. My arrest and growing interest in a coming trial was now becoming a public interest story that could no longer be contained within the walls of Vosse. Sloane was summoned to the magistrate's office soon after the letter of intent was submitted. This submission included a payment for the administration of the case, as well as a required meeting fee with their proposed client. The only remaining thing preventing them from officially becoming my lawyers was me. I was being held in a dark private cell deep within the governor's palace. I was sprawled on my back as usual. My arms were bound in a straitjacket. My mouth and broken jaw were bound together with a leather bridle. My eyes were still quite swollen, but my vision was returning. Sloane entered the cell and I feared the worst. That was when I saw Sherman and Marsek behind him, awaiting permission to enter.
Looks like you have a couple of visitors today. Shall I allow them in?
Sloane said with much foreboding. I looked at the two boys with pity and shook my head.
Well then, there it is. She says no. You saw her. Of course, the fee is non-refundable.
Sloane jeered.
Now hold on, Captain Sloane. She said no such thing. How can she say anything with that thing in her mouth?
Sherman charged in boldly. Sloane extended his powerful arm to hold him back.
Aermine, it is us, Sherman and Marsek. We've petitioned the court to represent you. You cannot face this alone,
the young scribe called out.
We demand you remove her mouth covering and allow us an opportunity to advise the accused of our services we intend to offer. This is our right. We paid for it.
Marsek reminded him of the law. Sloane relented and approached me slowly. He stared at me, eye to eye.
You even think of spewing any magic out of that mouth, and I'll lop your head off.
Sloane threatened me. He then loosened the leather belt from my sore jaw and pulled the bridle from my mouth. The nasty iron bar that had been in my mouth for weeks now tasted like rust. I spit out the remnants as the boys approached.
Aermine,
Miss Tia.
The boys closed in with a look of deep concern.
What are you two doing here?
I asked, in the only whispering fashion my swollen mouth would allow.
What have you done?
We have here a letter of intent to represent.
Marsek said with a smile.
To represent you. To face the charges that have been levied against you.
Why?
I asked dismissively. Looking at their inspired, innocent faces made my stomach turn. How much trouble had I now gotten them in?
Mist,
I said painfully.
He will kill me. There's nothing you can do.
Of that, I was quite certain.
There's no reason. But there is a reason,
Sherman said in a whisper.
We can encourage your testimony and have the story, your story, become part of the legal record, the public record,
Sherman said with emphasis.
The truth must be known.
He smiled at me. Sloane then approached from behind.
Sorry, boys. Seems to me she knows where she stands and has made her peace with it. Maybe the two of you should leave now. In fact, maybe you should both leave Vosse forever and go play lawyer with your mommies and daddies back in Torbana.
He said dismissively to Marsek.
Yes, yes, yes.
I said as loud as I could muster.
Yes, you can represent me.
I said.
Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications so you never miss an episode. Be sure to smash that like button and comment below. It helps a lot. If you'd like to help me get this book published, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. And as always, be sure to share this story with all of your friends on your favorite social media.